So this is our last workshop of 2023. I know. Austin started our workshops in February. I'm curious, if you were here in February for our first workshop, will you like drop a 1 in the chat or like an emoji, like a raised hand? Austin started our workshop series in February as part of our education arm. That's always been important to us with Moxie, that we're not, of course, we are the software, but we believe that really keeping people doing the work that they want to do and not having to go back to traditional work takes education and tools as well. So that's kind of where this came from. And it has been, I can't believe it's been a year of doing workshops. And we're so glad that you have joined us. So while we get started and do this transition, please say hi in the chat. Tell us where you are. Tell us what you do. We would love to say hello to you. And, you know, maybe you'll find a kindred spirit in the chat. So please drop any questions that you have, as always, in the Q&A as Austin kind of goes along with this workshop. I know I have like all the questions about pricing. It's like my least favorite thing when I'm like talking to a new client. It's always like, oh yeah, so how much is that going to cost? I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't matter how many clients I have. Maybe I'll never know. So I'm just going to take notes today.
Awesome. Well, should we dive in?
Let's do it.
Great. Okay, so let me awkwardly fumble through sharing my screen. All right. How does that look, Michelle?
Looks lovely.
Okay. So we're here to set smart strategic prices. And I will say right out of the gate that I'm going to cover 7 specific numbers, and I'm going to go fast enough that it's really not realistic for you to like pull out bank statements and like actually do the work. So just follow along. You'll have the recording later. And I really hope that you actually go through the steps before the new year. You start working on your new prices, because there is something that is so empowering about going into a new year, having already kind of announced, hey, you know, I'm raising my prices. So that's what we're here to do today. I assume that most of you will be raising your prices and not lowering them. Anyway, I'll introduce myself quickly. I'm the fractional CMO for Moxie. I'm an author. I have a new book coming out. Woo woo. Hard pitch right now. Just kidding. But the book is called Free Money. It is a pricing and money mindset guide. So it's essentially like a 240-page version of this workshop with a lot of other stuff thrown in. I'm also a business coach to freelancers and consultants, husband, father, writer, runner. I'm more barbecue obsessed than barbecue lover. I'll just say that. And I will say I definitely did not understand pricing when I first started freelancing. You know, I got a couple of degrees in English, and surprise, I never had a class on pricing. You know, they're like, hey, here's how to like read Shakespeare, but they don't say, here's how to make money as a writer. There's like none of that, right? And so I've been freelancing for, gosh, coming up on 15 years now. And I've just had to kind of fumble through all of the mistakes that you can make. I kind of had this crisis back in 2015, sort of a financial crisis, personal crisis. I go into that in the book. Anyway, this process that I'm about to show you originated in September of 2015, when I was like pulling out my hair and thinking, how on earth are we going to pay our bills? Right. So maybe crisis is the mother of all invention. Someone said that once. Not really. Okay. So I mentioned that I'm going to cover 7 key numbers, right? And so when you think about something like pricing or pricing process, really it's about math. And if you don't start with the right numbers for your math, well, the math can't kind of outperform the numbers you give it, right? And so we're going to talk through these, and these are what you're going to return to again and again, right? So before I get into survival number, which is the first one. Let me just briefly explain what I mean when I say rates versus prices. Okay. Rates are your internal units of calculation. Your rates will be private. You don't ever have to share them with a client. But when it comes time to put together a proposal or give a client a quote, what are you using for the math, right? I use my private, unpublished internal rates to calculate the prices that I then put in front of a client. So that's an important distinction. For those of you who are still charging hourly, maybe your rates and your prices are kind of the same thing. But as soon as you pivot to flat fees or fixed scope, fixed price projects, you're not going to share your rates anymore. All right, survival number. And I'll reiterate, I'm going to fly through this just so that we have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. But the very first number you want to come up with, your survival rate, is based on how much money you need to live each month. And I've found that a lot of us just don't love budgeting. We don't love the budgets. And what that means is we often don't know really accurately how much we spend each month. So this isn't the time to like say, all right, we have to tighten our belts and cut all the spending. You're just trying to figure out what you actually spend. So there are a couple of ways to do that. You export bank and credit card statements, grab 90 days worth of numbers, divide by 3, and that number will be the average across 90 days. So your monthly average. And you're like, okay, now we can stare reality in the face. This is how much money I or we, if you have a family, this is how much money we spend each month. That's where you're going to start. You're going to take it a step further because if you're a freelancer, you probably have business expenses too. Those can be a lot or a little, but either way, you're going to do the same thing. Go grab your business checking or savings account statements. Go grab your business credit card statement, add up 90 days worth of transactions, divide by 3. So if you don't have dedicated business checking and savings accounts, just let me have like my business dad moment and say, just please go use dedicated business checking and savings accounts, right? If you don't have those already, I won't be too paternalistic. I'll just say you just need to go back up to the 90 days worth of personal expenses. And then you need to pull out your business expenses in a separate worksheet in the same spreadsheet and just figure out what the monthly total on average is for your business expenses. Okay, so now you have your personal expenses monthly. You have your business expenses monthly. And I will say that like, well, let me go here first. You're going to forget something, right? Like we have like yearly software subscriptions that we forget about. There's like that sneaky domain registration. So those of you who are like super anal and you want to always score the A+, I mean, I was that guy, if I'm honest, like in school, I'm like, just tell me what to do for the A and I'll do it. Right. But what we're after is a ballpark number. Okay. About how much are you spending each month for personal expenses? Same for business. Here is a list. You can take a screenshot of this, or you can just return to the recording later. Here are just sort of categories of business expenses that a lot of us have. And there are some sneaky ones, like I said. Okay, so after you've got personal and business expenses, you have to think about taxes. My very first year as a freelancer, I really got stung by this one. I had finally built up cash reserves. I was feeling like a bona fide adult. I mean, look at this gorgeous emergency fund, right? That I now have because I'm a grown man. And then tax season comes around in the US in April. And sure enough, I hadn't paid taxes quarterly because I was a brand new freelancer and I had no idea what I was doing. And I totally wiped out my savings account just to pay the taxes that I owed. It's a lot less painful if you just go ahead and factor in what you expect to owe taxes into this survival number that I talked about. So there are a couple of different ways that you can calculate your expected or anticipated tax percentage. Um, mine for 2022 was 18.5%. That's a little bit lower than for other freelancers in other states because Tennessee doesn't have a state income tax. That's why you can't just use my percentage. Go and look at your tax return from last year, ideally, or talk to your CPA. But this is the next number you need to grab is, hey, about how much are you going to pay toward taxes every single month, right? Okay. Now, once you have those three numbers, you can calculate what I call your survival number, right? So what you're going to do is think about how much money you need total. And by total, I mean encompasses personal and business expenses and what you'll owe in taxes, what you'll owe every single month, right? And then I've got the math here. If you don't have a really good handle on your tax percentage, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But regardless, if you need something like $3,000 each month for your business and personal expenses, and your tax percentage is something like 20%, then you really need to be earning something like $3,750 each month. So that $750 goes into a savings account where you keep money you'll owe for tax, and then $3,000 you just spend on your expenses, right? So if you were to annualize that number, 3,750 times 12 gives you $45,000. So that would be your survival number. You really can't make less than that, $45,000 per year without going into debt, right? So that's what I mean by survival number. It's the minimum, it's the threshold, right? So, I almost smile when I look at like $3,000 a month here because my family of 5 could not survive on $3,000 a month where we live. My annual survival number is more like $108,000. So I'll just say, I'll touch on this again later, but this right here is why you can't just blindly copy another freelancer's prices, because their numbers just may be very different. They may live in a city that has a much lower cost of living. They may have fewer financial obligations. They may have a lot more financial obligations. So that's why I developed this process. It's just a bad idea to copy someone else's prices because chances are your survival number is just very different. Okay. True availability. Now, two of the big mistakes that we make when we're calculating prices is that we overestimate how many hours we can work in a given week and how many of those hours that we can actually bill to clients. So even if you work 40 or 50 hours, you will not bill 40 or 50 hours to your clients. I think we know that. And yet, when we set our prices, a lot of this stuff gets just very squishy. So we end up just having oversimplified math, right? Now I have an example of that at the bottom. Like, okay, 4 weeks in a month, I work about 40 hours in a week. That's 160 hours in a month. I need to make $5,000 per month, and I need to charge. Well, again, the gotcha here is, well, you're never going to consistently bill 40 hours to clients per week because you'll manage email and you'll, go to the bathroom. You're just not going to spend all of your waking hours. You're not going to bill clients for all those. So the key is to take a step back from the year and think, okay, let me start by thinking, how much time will I not be working? Right? I'm going to take vacation. I'm going to do some holidays. I'll have some sick days and personal days. So go ahead and estimate when you won't work, round that up to 7 to get like full weeks. Subtract that number from 52. And now you'll have a much more accurate number to say, okay, like I plan to be in office, so to speak, 46 hours 46 weeks. That would be wonderful. Being in office only 46 hours over the next year. But, out of the next 52 weeks, I'm only going to work like 46, right? Then what I can do is like think about, well, how many hours realistically can I work each week? Which you'll hear me say that word realistic again and again and again, because a lot of the flaws in our pricing have their root in unrealistic numbers. So once you know a realistic number of weeks in a year you will work, then you can think about the number of realistic hours in a week you can work. And for me, that normally ends up being around 38. Some weeks it's higher, some weeks it's lower. My wife was sick yesterday. I had more childcare responsibilities. And so I ended up working fewer hours. That's just the way it goes, right? What is your average? That's what you're looking for here. So once you have your work weeks in a year and your hours in an average week, you can multiply those two numbers together, and that's your approximate like time inventory across 12 months, across a year. I do recommend at this point that you give yourself a hug, because this is a lot of math. Math was never my favorite. But once you have that number, right? Like, oh, here's how many hours I can realistically expect to work across a year. You can't stop there, right? Because if we go back to what I said earlier, even if I can work 38 hours a week, I can't bill clients for all those hours. So you have to reduce the number further and think, well, realistically, how many of my work hours become billable hours? And so for me, because I've been doing this a while, that realistic percentage is 60%, right? So if you take your available time inventory and multiply it by the decimal that you created from your percentage, and I gave you an example there, then you can come up with like how many realistic hours you can bill in a year. So I know I just threw a lot at you. Let me just simplify it. How many weeks will I work over the next 12 months? Answer that question. How many hours each week will I work on average? Answer that question. How many of those can I realistically bill? Answer that question. And you'll come up with a number like this, right? So my time inventory in a year is around 1,748. But when I multiply that times my effectiveness, that gives me just over 1,000 hours, 1,048 hours that I can spend on client projects and bill to clients. You see how different that is from 1,748. Imagine if I had based my prices on the higher number, they would be way off, right? So we have a realistic number, or what I call true availability here. Okay, so you have your survival number, you have your true availability. If you divide one into the other, you get what I call your survival rate. So I mentioned that I need to make about 108,000 every year in order to not go into debt. That's just my family's living expenses, for better or worse, plus taxes. If I divide that by 1,048, my survival rate is $103 per hour. Now, I'm not recommending that you all bill hourly. I'm just saying if the amount of time that I put into a project means that at the end of the project, when all the smoke clears, if I'm making less than $103 per hour, my prices are not sustainable. What we're after here is true sustainability. That's why you go to the trouble of going through this process, right? Okay. But raise your hand in the chat if you got into freelancing or consulting because you just wanted to scrape by and survive. It's like, nope. So we're not going to stop with the survival rate. We need to think beyond that. Now, the first exercise is one that out of all these is the most fun. It's like, if you were making extra money, what would you do with it? And this isn't a bit of an aside, I recognize, but I think we're often not effective at advocating for ourselves because we don't even know what the money is for. Like, if you were to make an extra like $10,000 next year, what would you do with it? Would you blow it all on, Nike Jordans? I might. No. Would you buy a Tesla? Or would you like accelerate your debt pay down? Would you take your grandmother to Japan to see her sister for the first time in 20 years? One of my coaching clients, that was the bucket list. Her grandmother was from Japan. Her grandmother hadn't seen her aunt in 20 years. And she was like, I want to take my grandmother there. And I'm like, that is incredible. Like, what a gorgeous goal, right? So if you allow yourself to dream a little bit, what is the money for? And believe me, if you know what the money is for, when it comes time to actually negotiate a higher price, you'll be more effective. Okay. So think about what the extra money might be for. There are a bunch of different things that you could come up with, most likely. You can draw inspiration from some of what my coaching clients have mentioned. Go to Norway to enjoy the architecture. That shows how ignorant I was. I did not know that Norway was known for their architecture, but we can always learn something, right? I love the one that one client said, hand out wads of cash to cashiers and servers around Christmas. Just blessing other people, just being wildly generous. I'm like, oh, that is so appealing, right? Okay, so once you have a little bit of clarity around what the extra money would even be for, you can take your annualized, like, think about a monthly amount, right? Multiply that times 12, then add that to your survival number from before. So I have several things that I would spend money on right now. I would grow our emergency fund, my family's emergency fund. My wife and I have a heinous plot to put a pool in so we can keep a close eye on our kids' friends. And if all of our kids' friends want to hang out at our house, then we'll know who they're hanging out with. We'll end up spending more time with our kids. It's important to my wife and I that we remain close with our kids through their teenage years. And as funny as it sounds, the pool is the organizing principle for us. Anyway, I want a riding cabin in my backyard. These are my 3 of my goals. But again, your math is figure out about how much extra money you'd like to be making per month. Add that to your survival number. That will give you your dream number across a year. And once you have your annual dream number, well, you take that same number of hours of your true availability. That's what gives you your dream rate. I know I'm throwing a bunch of language at you here. I don't apologize, unfortunately. But this will just pull all the numbers into one slide, right? I will work about 46 weeks realistically over the next 52 weeks. I'll work 38 hours per week on average, but I can only bill about 60% of those. So my true availability is 1,048 hours. That puts my survival rate at $103 an hour. But when I think about how much extra money per month do I want to be making? Well, my dream number is $153,000. When I divide that by my true availability, I really need to be making $156 an hour across the projects that I bill to clients. Hopefully that all makes sense. And again, you can come back and reference this recording later. We have 2 more steps. These are super important because, to be honest, How am I doing on time, Michelle?
Fine. Keep going.
Great. So it may sound funny to go from talking about a dream rate, let's dream dreams, to a pessimistic price. You'll see what I mean here in a second, right? I think another mistake we make with our pricing is we're too optimistic. We forget all the different ways that we will spend time in order to make a project, um, like to bring it to a place where we're comfortable even saying it's done, right? So these bullet points are all of the different ways we spend time on projects, right? So we underestimate how much time that takes. And that will ultimately drive down your effective hourly rate in a project. So if you think that a project's going to take you 10 hours and it takes you more like 13 because you just forgot how many extra meetings are going to be involved, it's like, oh. So the first thing to do, right, is pick a project that you typically do a lot of. So if you're a writer, it might be writing a blog post, or if you're a designer, it might be designing a new visual identity or logo, right? Anyway, you need to get a very accurate estimate of the number of hours you put into that project. And if you already use a time tracking app like Moxie, Hard Pitch, if you already use a time tracking app, then you should be able to just go into the time tracking app, run a report, find that type of project, you know, cross-reference it with the list of tasks that you created, and just ask yourself, is it accurate? Do I need to add more time? But the goal in this step is to say, here's a type of project that I do, and here's a reasonably accurate number of hours that I put in order to, deliver that project beginning to end, right? So for example, let's say I were to write a case study for one of my freelance writing clients. When I add up everything, including like emails and kickoff calls and writing and editing and all that, I came up with 12.25 hours, right? And I just rounded up. So 13 hours. That's the realistic number. Again, I'm beating that realistic drum here. Well, if you take my dream rate from earlier and I multiply that times the realistic number of hours I put in, that gives me 1898, right? But here's the thing. Are our clients usually on their best behavior? Meaning, even if that's the number of hours that I expect to put in, does it always work out that way? And it usually doesn't, right? So why don't we budget for human nature? And why don't we set prices that, enable us to expect our parents to be, or our parents, sorry, that was quite a slip there. Maybe it's coming out of Thanksgiving, right? Anyway, why don't we set prices that just can accommodate clients when they're on their worst behavior, not their best? So what I typically do is do this math, and then I add another 20%. So you take that number and you multiply it by 1.2. And that's how you get your pessimistic price. So what I mean by pessimistic price is you're using your dream rate to calculate the price, and then you're adding 20% to that because you expect for the client to need an extra meeting, to go dark for a while, to basically just not be super responsive for a week, whatever. That's your pessimistic price, right? So once you have that price, take a look at it. Ask yourself, would I be glad to make that amount of money for that amount of work? Just like kind of poke at it a little bit and see how you feel, right? Would you feel good about putting that price in front of a real person, a real client? Would you be embarrassed to put that price in front of a real client? Does it seem way too high? test it a little bit, because how we feel about our prices is important too. All right. Now, the last step, and then we'll get to Q&A, is making the price weirdly precise. And the way you do that typically is just by changing double zeros into a 25 or a 50. But here's the idea. If I give you a price of $1,500, that kind of seems arbitrary. But if I give you a price of $1,475, that does not seem arbitrary. Or $1,625. No, the precision of the price makes it seem like I followed a very specific process to arrive here. And those little increments of 25 here, 75 there, usually aren't enough to like lose you the project, right? So if you were to charge 525 rather than 500 for a blog post, that extra $25 isn't going to make the client say, nope, not happening, too expensive, right? If they could afford 500, they could afford 525. But those little wins will add up for you across a year. So make your prices weirdly precise. And just so you know that, like, I'm not just like pulling this out of thin air. I stumbled across this quote in this book, Never Split the Difference, by a former FBI hostage negotiator named Chris Voss. But he said, and I'm going to read the bold, but anything you throw out that sounds less rounded, say 37,263, feels like a figure that you came to as a result of thoughtful calculation. So the point is, your prices will be easier to negotiate if you use weirdly precise numbers. So I've used these for years now. I just started doing this randomly, and then it worked. And I can honestly say I've never been bitten by this. But yeah, salt your prices with specificity, change those zeros to 25 or 75, and just see what happens, because those little gains can add up across a year. All right, here were the numbers. And again, please come back, reference the recording later, go through the steps, and come up with each of these numbers for yourself, knowing that if you have these numbers, then when you do put a price out there, you'll know exactly why. All right. Let me also just like say that it's okay if you don't charge your dream rate 100% of the time, right? I think of my survival rate and my dream rate kind of as like bumpers on either side of a lane at the bowling alley. And you may just kind of bounce back and forth between your survival rate and your dream rate, but that will get you to the end and you'll knock some pins down. So as you look at your prices, you may find that you can be a little bit more aggressive if you already have financial stability and sustainability, and you're okay losing out on a project by giving a really high aggressive price. Whereas if you're just trying to achieve financial stability, I get that you may not feel like you can be as aggressive with your prices. You can't go all the way up to your dream rate tomorrow. You need to just be a few increments above your survival rate. I get that, right? But you'll have this process. You can return to it again and again. Yeah, your dream rate is a reference point. It is not a precious baby child you must defend tooth and claw. All right, bowling alley bumpers, already covered that. And I will say, I already talked about advocacy for yourself. Once you know what your smart, strategic, sustainable prices are, you'll be in a much better position when a project comes your way and you look at the project and then the client tells you the budget and they're like, here's what I can afford to pay, and it's at or below your survival rate, you know you have to say no. Like you have to, because you know what your numbers are. So that is it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And
snaps for all the math. I loved it.
I'm sorry.
No, I loved it. It was
Sorry
excellent.
about the
Okay.
math.
Math makes the world go round, or that's what they told me, when I was in grade school. Okay. I want to talk quickly. I think we can cover both of these at once about figuring in market rates for similar products or services. So how do you do research on competitor rates? Do you consider industry specific freelance associations a good source for those competitor rates?
So yes, short answer, yes. Like the AWIA, no, yeah, AWAI, sorry. They publish rates for like freelance writers, and that is a good reference point for sure. There are factors that factor into what you can price projects at, like your confidence, sometimes your experience and expertise, certainly your positioning out there in the market. But just remember that when you're looking at competitors and what they charge, they may charge that much because they copied someone else. And then the person they copied someone else. So I really do recommend that you start with this process and come up with your numbers on your own. And then if you need to go gut check yourself with like price sheets that you find online somewhere, I get that. You're like, um, you just want to like I said, gut check, temperature check, but I would I wouldn't like go and check on what competitors are charging until the last minute, so to speak.
Love that. Okay, lots of questions around contracting, subcontracting. So let's start with, I have a subcontractor. What's the best way to include her work in my rates?
I normally just go to my subs and say, what do you want to be making? And then I'll either, raise that price. If I'm going to be charging for project management, I may just pass on my cost, like exactly what I'm paying to a subcontractor, just pass that on to my client and not, mark up what they're charging me. Some projects now I'm not in the middle. I just connect my client directly with my subs. But all that to say, it's totally fine to mark up what your subs are charging you, especially if they're pleased with what they're charging you. So have an honest conversation with them.
How do you advise anyone who's being contracted as a freelancer by an agency on behalf of a client project?
Honestly, own a direct relationship with most or all of your clients. I worked as a subcontractor for agencies for years, but as I kept raising my prices, it kept being harder and harder for agencies to justify hiring me because my rates were comparable or higher. I had enough situations where agencies kind of fumbled project management, made me look bad, created extra work for me. Maybe the account executive or the project manager had less experience than I did. So I think if your relationship with your clients is always mediated by someone else, there's always friction and complexity caused by that. So again, start to stack up relationships that you own, not relationships with agencies. That's my best advice.
Hmm.
Otherwise, like you can go to the agency and just say, hey, I need to raise my rates 10% or 20% or whatever. And if you've got a really good relationship with them, they will probably say, okay.
Dan asks, I'm a designer marketer. What's the best way to approach a current client about raising rates?
So, Michelle, remind me after this, and we can include a link to my rate increase email template. I normally email clients, tell them I need to raise my rates, and then give them the start on or effective date for that rate increase. And then offer to hop on a call just to answer any questions or address any concerns they have. So start with an email, offer a call. And eventually just bite the bullet. And one little tactical thing, I usually don't send those emails the same day I write them. So write the email the day before, just in a text doc, leave it on your desktop, get your emotions under control, and then send it the next day.
I love it. What if you see that the clients in your current market don't want to pay those prices? Move to a different market, mix up the services you offer?
I think that's a great question. Certain niches, certain industries will place a higher value on the type of work you do than others. So, for example, like technology companies, software companies are often willing to pay a lot more for a blog post than like a plumbing company or another type of home services company. So, think about the industries or the niches that place a high value on the type of work that you do. Like I mentioned case studies earlier. I've charged $3,000 for case studies, but I could not charge that to most types of clients, right? I was able to charge that much to consultants because if they win one new consulting engagement, it might be worth $100,000 to them. So just again, do some brainstorming. Which niches highly value what you do, target them, and sure enough, you'll be able to charge more in those niches that see higher return on investment with your work.
I think we can get this one in. I'm just getting started and looking for a CPA. I got a referral from a friend, but they're not taking new clients. Any tips on how to choose a CPA?
Woof. I mean,
That's a hot tip right there.
keep asking around, interview 2 to 3, like get to know 2 or 3. My bookkeeper was not my CPA, and my bookkeeper was like, why is your CPA so grumpy? I think personality matters. Right? With everyone we work with, we want expertise, but we also want to enjoy working with people. So get more referrals, interview 2 or 3 people, go with the person that you have really good chemistry with, and then just pay close attention to their professionalism, like how responsive they are, communication. It's just like when one of our clients hires us, right? Like a more expensive CPA may give you better service, and that's why they charge more, right? So just recognize that this is a two-way street. We want to raise our prices and we want to do better work, but when you go and hire a subcontractor or you go hire someone who offers professional services like a lawyer or CPA, you need to be prepared to pay more for a better experience and better expertise, better quality.
Lily mentioned Collective. They do taxes and bookkeeping. They also do lots of these types of webinars as well that are specific kind of around accounting and taxes. And their people are incredible. Like I've been so impressed with the webinars and things that I've seen on Collective. So a little plug there, not sponsored.
Yeah. And to your point, it's not a bad idea to like find an accounting firm or a CPA firm that actually has experience working with another professional like you, right? You don't necessarily want a CPA where most of their book of business is construction companies and you're like a software developer. Like find a CPA who works with other software developers.
That is our time. That was incredible and a lot of numbers. So don't worry, we'll send you the recording. We'll send you the full deck. So you can kind of go through it at your leisure. And we're so glad that you're here. We're so glad that you've been with us for these workshops for 2023. And we'll have more of these coming soon. But until then, enjoy the end of your year and wish you all good things. See you in 2024. Awkward Zoom wave.
Later. Princess wave.